There's a profound observation worth considering. Buddhism represents Hinduism stripped down for transmission beyond India's borders. You see, Hinduism encompasses far more than what Western minds classify as religion. It permeates cooking methods, family structures, architectural practices, essentially everything. It's an entire way of being woven into Indian soil and culture, making it as untransferable as Japanese Shinto. You cannot export these complete cultural systems. Yet within Hinduism exist essential elements that can transcend cultural boundaries. Buddhism emerged as precisely such a vehicle for transmission. So let me distill what Buddhism fundamentally addresses. The word Buddha derives from the Sanskrit root bud, meaning to awaken. The Buddha, then, is the awakened one, the person who woke up. Woke up from what? Obviously, from a dream. And what kind of dream? I would characterize it as a state of hypnosis, though I'm using hypnosis in an archaic sense. It's a state of being entranced, spellbound, utterly fascinated. This condition is called Avidya in Sanskrit. Vidya means knowledge. It's the root that gave us vidya in Latin, meaning to see, which evolved into our English word vision, placing the negating prefix a before it creates not seeing ignorance. Not ignorance in the sense of lacking information, but ignorance where you see yet ignore everything you're not directly focusing upon. When you place a chicken's beak on a white chalk line and it becomes so fascinated it cannot escape, that's avidya. Similarly, our attention was captured, our beaks placed on a chalk line, when we became hypnotized into experiencing life through conscious attention alone, through the spotlight consciousness, to the exclusion of floodlight awareness. We began imagining ourselves as separate, isolated individuals. This is what Buddhism calls the view of separateness. A Buddha is one who has transcended this illusion, who has awakened from this hypnotic state. And what such a person knows well, I cannot express in positive terms. This represents Buddhism's special quality. Everything in Buddhism sounds negative. Today, we're exploring this profound tradition not to convert you, but to examine what happens when someone systematically removes every belief you're clinging to. What remains when all your conceptual ground disappears beneath your feet? This channel exists for those seeking philosophical depth and psychological insight into consciousness, human nature, and authentic existence. If these explorations resonate with you, consider subscribing, leaving a like, and sharing your thoughts in the comments. What we're examining today might fundamentally shift how you understand belief, certainty, and the nature of awakening itself. Let's approach this differently. Imagine you encounter a Buddha and understand there are countless Buddhas, not just Gautama, the historical figure everyone recognizes. One awakened being tends to create others through relationship, turning people into Buddhas themselves. You meet one of these awakened individuals, and they're going to give you a challenging time. Take Krishnamurti, for instance, one of the Buddhas operating in our contemporary world. Krishnamurti systematically dismantles everyone's religion. Why do you believe this? Why are you clinging to that notion? Why do you insist this particular idea is true? He demonstrates that all your fixed formulations, all the concepts you grasp desperately, are fundamentally spurious. Then suddenly you experience a kind of vertigo, a dizziness. You feel the solid ground beneath you has transformed into water, or worse, air, or worse, still empty space itself. There's nothing left to hold on to. When people discuss religion, they often say, I need a religion because I need something to hold on to. But that's precisely the wrong way to approach religion. If you use religion as something to cling to, your religion expresses unfaith, not faith. Faith is where you let go, not where you hold on. When a cat falls from a tree, the cat relaxes. The cat lands with a soft impact and remains unharmed because the cat has faith. But if the cat in midair suddenly tried to grab itself with all 4 feet and tighten up, it would be injured. That's what people do when they sing Rock of Ages, cleft for me, let me hide myself in thee. They want something to grip, and that fundamentally is unfaith. So the method of Buddhism, called the Dharma, which doesn't mean law but rather method, is to knock the psychological stuffing out of you, to remove everything you're clinging to cleanse you completely of all beliefs, all ideas, all concepts about what existence means, to leave you utterly let go. Buddhism has no doctrines you must believe in. I don't care what background you bring, whether you're Roman Catholic at one extreme or a logical positivist at the other. Both are clinging to something, The method of Buddhism is to knock out these underpinnings and say, we not only don't believe in anything, we don't even believe in not believing in anything. You know the defensive move of crawling into a hole and pulling the hole in after you? In Buddhism, you do the exact opposite. You crawl into great space and then pull the space out after you. To undergo this process is genuinely difficult. You can begin on what seems merely an intellectual level, engaging people in discussion, and whenever they propose an idea that guides their life, you demolish it. You demonstrate it doesn't hold water. Step by step, you unearth the fundamental ideas they operate on. Everyone is a philosopher. Everyone has metaphysics, though they may never have examined it. By this method, you bring it out into the open and demolish it. Suddenly, what seemed like pleasant intellectual discussion transforms into something resembling murder. People develop tremors, symptoms of extreme anxiety. Finally, they ask the teacher, "What do you believe in?" The response, "I'm not proposing anything. I haven't set anything up." Well, how do you navigate? How do you exist? This is the critical problem. What we're transitioning from, as I suggested earlier, is navigation on solid land to navigation in water. This shift is profoundly relevant today because modern science's impact on Western culture has been remarkably similar. In Christianity, we sing hymns like "How Firm a Foundation" and "Rock of Ages." "Ein fester Burg," a mighty fortress is our God. We imagine something solid to stand upon. The Church's one foundation is Jesus Christ, her Lord. This firm foundation, then suddenly it all disappears or becomes implausible, and we find ourselves swimming or sinking. When you discover you're living in a universe of pure relativity, there's nothing to hold on to. You must learn to swim. And to swim, you must relax. Stop grabbing. This is what Buddhism accomplishes when it teaches the art of letting go, of non-attachment. Non-attachment doesn't mean losing your appetite for dinner. It means stopping the grasping, eliminating stickiness. Like when a wheel's axle is too tight and sticks, you want to loosen it. Not too loose so it becomes floppy, like people who, when told to relax, become limp rags. That's not relaxation. Relaxation maintains tone but releases excessive tension. It's a middle way. This is entirely what Buddhism addresses. Learning to exist in freefall without panic. When you were born, you were kicked off a precipice. You're falling. Nothing can stop this descent. Although there are rocks falling alongside you with trees growing on them, you can cling to one of those rocks for safety if you wish. But it's not safe. Nothing is safe. Everything is falling apart. Everything exists in a state of perpetual change, and there's no way to stop it. When you genuinely accept this, when you truly resign yourself to this reality, nothing remains to fear. And when nothing remains to fear, when you've surrendered everything, then there's nothing left to be afraid of. Many people in religion cling to suffering because they know they're righteous as long as they hurt. I bless the good Lord for my afflictions, for my mental and bodily pains. For without them my faith dissolves, and I'm doomed to hell's unending flames. But that's an illusion too. Even suffering offers no security. Even suicide offers no security. In Buddhism, there is no security whatsoever. You simply must face this fact. Everything is in flux, and you must go with it. The question then becomes, how do you convince people of this? If anyone wants to be convinced, because this isn't something you force upon people, you don't convert them to this understanding, because if they don't want to be converted, they won't let go. Buddhism, therefore, involves a very specific relationship between questioner and teacher, between pupil and master. If you're engaging deeply with these ideas and want to understand the psychological structures that keep us trapped in illusion, I've written an ebook called Beyond the Shadow that explores Carl Jung's core concepts. It examines the unconscious mind, shadow integration, and the individuation process. If you're serious about this inner work, you'll find the link in the description below. Now, Buddhism arrived in China as early as 60 CE, but it didn't initially make much impression. It wasn't until approximately 400 CE that a remarkable Sanskrit scholar named Kumarajiva arrived and began teaching Chinese scholars Sanskrit. They collaborated to translate Buddhist scriptures into Chinese. They didn't translate everything immediately. Buddhist scriptures occupy roughly as much space as the Encyclopedia Britannica, perhaps more. Indians are prolific talkers. But here's what happened. When translating Sanskrit into Chinese, they needed to find equivalent Chinese words for Sanskrit concepts. They discovered these equivalents in Taoist philosophy. Slowly, Indian attitudes became modified by Chinese perspectives. The Chinese began reading Taoist meanings into these translations. Things shifted. Here's the crucial alteration. First, Indian Buddhism contains very little humor. Chinese life, however, is saturated with humor. The greatest philosopher of China, Zhuangzi, is perhaps the only philosopher in the entire world who is profoundly humorous. There's a book in the modern library published by Random House called The Wisdom of Lao Tzu, translated by Lin Yutang. He includes with Laozi's text enormous sections of Zhuangzi, and this is absolutely fascinating because of its humor. Indian Buddhism had very little humor, some, but minimal. Second, Indian Buddhism was tied to celibacy, which the Chinese found absolutely incomprehensible. Chinese civilization is structured around the family to a far greater extent than even Western culture. They simply couldn't perceive any point or wisdom in celibacy. When Buddhism entered China, it retained some element of celibacy, but for different reasons than Hindu India. The Chinese approach to celibacy isn't that sexuality is wicked, but rather that it's terribly convenient not to have a wife. The ideal of the uninvolved life has certain appeal, but they could never accept the notion that sexual desire was inherently bad, which has always played a fairly strong role in Hindu thinking. Hindus don't have the guilt perspective that the West does, but they believe sexuality dissipates spiritual energies. In yoga, they envision the kundalini at the spine's base, the serpent power, the force of psychic energy. As long as it remains at the spine's base, this energy dissipates in sexuality. Yoga aims to draw this force up the spine into the head, withdrawing energy from its sexual manifestation to elevate it to a higher level. Though which end is up is debatable, you can approach it the opposite way too. They have what's called the right-hand path and the left-hand path. The Chinese didn't see it this way. They couldn't perceive sexuality as energy dissipation. What they sought was a way of living Buddhism, of being awake, while simultaneously remaining active in ordinary worldly life. This is what's expressed in their phraseology. Being king on the outside and sage on the inside, managing practical affairs, completely engaged in whatever life presents, while inwardly dwelling on the mountaintop, cloud hidden, whereabouts unknown. Chinese Zen represents the preeminent expression of this synthesis, the mixture of Indian Buddhism and Chinese Taoism, plus a certain Confucian practicality. Zen developed from Kumarajiva's work. He had two disciples who began approaching Buddhism from a Taoist perspective. They were actually Zen's originators. Then, around 500 CE, another Indian arrived in China, Bodhidharma. Bodhidharma catalyzed Zen as a specific movement. Bodhidharma had a student named Huike. That's the Chinese pronunciation. In Japanese, it sounds like Eka, just as Zen is the Japanese pronunciation of Chinese Chan. The story goes that when Huike came to Bodhidharma, Bodhidharma refused to accept him as a student. All Zen masters do this. They reject you, which stimulates you to return stronger if you're genuinely committed to learning. Huike returned stronger and stronger, and Bodhidharma resisted proportionally. Finally, Huike cut off his left arm and presented it to Bodhidharma, saying, "Look, here's my left arm, given to you as proof that nothing in the world matters to me, except discovering what you're about." Bodhidharma said, "What do you want to know?" Huike replied, "I have no peace of mind. Please pacify my mind." In Chinese, mind is ing, pronounced shin, the heart mind, the psychic center. Bodhidharma said, "Bring out your zine here before me, and I will pacify it." Huike said, "When I look for it, I can't find it." Bodhidharma said, "Then it's pacified." And Huike immediately understood everything. That's the experience called Satori in Japanese, Wu in Chinese Mandarin, and in Cantonese dialect, well, it's pronounced differently. It's what we call in modern psychological jargon the aha phenomenon. The aha phenomenon. Now I see. What was all this about? Zen is a translation of the Sanskrit word dhyana, pronounced chan in Chinese, then in Japanese unfortunately rendered as Zen, which is untranslatable in English. It designates a certain state of consciousness, sometimes called meditation, but that won't do at all. Contemplation isn't really the point. Chinese has a different word for contemplation. Sometimes it's called one-pointedness of mind, but I prefer translating this word with the notion of total presence of mind. When we say someone is mentally unstable, we often say they're not all there. Now imagine the opposite. Visualize someone who is completely there, completely here, someone who lives totally and absolutely now. This doesn't mean they're incapable of thinking about past or future. Thoughts about past and future are included in the present. You have them now. But imagine someone who isn't distracted, who when talking to you gives you their whole being, who doesn't look over your shoulder wandering after something else. Someone who is completely here, so completely here that you can't phase them. This idea of phasing is crucial in Zen. I referred earlier to attachment, that Buddhism is living free from attachments. This isn't abandoning healthy appetite, but stopping sticking. In psychological terms, not blocking. A mind of no hesitation, as it's sometimes called in Chinese. The phrase wu suo is used, meaning going straight ahead. Suppose someone walks up to you on the street and asks, "Are you saved?" Most intelligent people feel embarrassed by such questions. What's this Salvation Army person or Jehovah's Witness doing, asking me whether I'm saved? We feel slightly uncomfortable. What do you do with such a person? But in Zen, this is a perfect moment to respond to the most embarrassing question. Are you saved? Zen comes back in a very specific way. In Zen, you don't give philosophical answers to such questions. You give practical answers. I had a boiled egg this morning. Whenever you're asked about matters sacred, theoretical, and philosophical, you answer in terms of things earthy and practical. But conversely, when asked about things earthy and practical, you answer in terms of things religious and philosophical. Is dinner ready? Who's asking this question? Who are you? This is the flavor of Zen. Bodhidharma supposedly meditated so long his legs fell off. He's usually drawn in this rounded form, looks somewhat like those weighted toys you can't knock over. In Japan, you buy these Daruma dolls that are weighted at the bottom, so you can bat them on the floor, bat them this way, bat them that way, but they always stand up again. There's a poem, 7 times down, 8 times up, such is life. This is the principle of not being phased, of non-attachment. The game of you can't phase me is fundamental in the art of lifemanship, in gamesmanship. When Zen monks moved into Kyoto, they took over the best part of town. How this happened is simply fantastic. The beautiful hills were occupied by brigands who later became the Japanese nobility, the great daimyos. These were the toughest characters. These Zen monks played a game with them. You possess all these lands, you're powerful, and so on, but so what? It's all falling apart. Then what will you do? Well, that's unfortunate. We don't know. The Zen monk would say, "Oh, you haven't grasped the essential thing." They discovered they couldn't terrify these monks. They played all sorts of intimidation tricks, but the Zen monks were superior masters at the game. Suppose you tell someone, "Look, I'm not afraid of you. You can do anything you like. You can kill me or anything at all. But if I then kill the person who says this, I'll never discover whether they were truly afraid or not." So they outfaced these powerful men and said, "We have a secret you don't possess, and we'll teach your warriors this secret. They'll learn it too, and they won't be afraid of anything." This is precisely what they did. The daimyos, the noblemen, built magnificent monasteries for these Zen masters and monks on their finest land. The greatest artists of Japan made gold leaf screens for almost every room. And although no individual owns anything personally, the community owns it collectively with the protection of the daimyos. They had a tremendous arrangement going. To Western minds, this sounds extremely peculiar, even immoral. You don't expect religious people to behave this way. But these people weren't pretending to be especially virtuous. They didn't deceive themselves. They were people who understood human nature, that in every one of us exists an element of irreducible rascality. In Jewish theology, this is called the Yetzirah. The Yetzirah is the element of irreducible rascality that was created by God because God has one too. That's why when you're genuinely affectionate with someone, when you're truly intimate, well, there's an understanding that we're all a bit of a rascal. For those wanting to explore how to work practically with these insights in daily life, I've also created Dialogues with the Unconscious, a 30-day practical guide for applying Jungian psychology through exercises in shadow work, active imagination, and integrating unconscious material. It's not theory, it's application. The link is in the description if this work resonates with you. Now let's return to this concept of dhyana, of Zen, as total presence of mind. Zen doesn't mean sitting quietly in meditation posture, though that's certainly one practice method. Zen means being completely present in whatever you're doing, whether washing dishes, chopping wood, or engaging in conversation. The Zen approach to life isn't about withdrawing from activity. It's about being so completely engaged in the present moment that there's no psychological residue, no stickiness, no blocking. When a Zen master strikes a student with a stick, it's not punishment. It's a method of shocking the student into immediate presence. The question isn't whether the blow was fair or deserved. The question is, are you here, right now, completely? Most of us live in a kind of psychological twilight, partially present, partially lost in thoughts about past and future. We're conversing with someone while simultaneously planning dinner, reviewing yesterday's argument, worrying about tomorrow's meeting. We're never fully anywhere. Zen training aims to break this habit completely. There's a famous koan. What was your original face before your parents were born? This isn't a riddle to be solved intellectually. It's a question designed to stop your thinking mind completely. When rational thought exhausts itself trying to answer, something else emerges: direct perception without conceptual interference. The same with questions like, what is the sound of one hand clapping? Your rational mind spins uselessly. But the question isn't requesting a clever answer. It's requesting that you stop thinking and be. This is why Zen appears so paradoxical, so frustrating to the Western intellectual mind. We're trained to solve problems through analysis, through breaking things into component parts. Zen does the opposite. It shows you that the problem-solving mind is itself the problem. Once you grasp this, not intellectually, but experientially, everything shifts. Life stops being a series of problems requiring solutions and becomes simply what it is. This moment exactly as it is. That doesn't mean you stop planning or thinking. It means you stop being tyrannized by thought. Thought becomes a tool you use when appropriate, not a prison you're trapped within. The Zen practitioner can think brilliantly when thinking is appropriate, but can also drop thinking completely when it's not. Most of us cannot do this. We think compulsively, endlessly, even when it serves no purpose. Zen training breaks this compulsion. There's a story of a Zen master who was asked, "What happens when an enlightened person dies?" He answered, "I don't know." The student was shocked. "But you're a Zen master." The master replied, "Yes, but not a dead one." This exemplifies the Zen approach. Complete honesty about what you actually know versus what you're merely speculating about. No pretense, no claims to knowledge you don't possess. This radical honesty extends to every aspect of life. Zen doesn't ask you to believe anything. It doesn't promise anything. It simply says, look, see what's actually here. Don't add conceptual overlays, don't interpret, just see. And in that pure seeing, something remarkable happens. The sense of separation between observer and observed dissolves. You realize you are not separate from what you're experiencing. You are the experiencing itself. This isn't mysticism. It's the most practical thing in the world. When you're chopping wood and you're completely present, the axe, the wood, the motion, there's no you separate from the activity. There's just chopping. When you're listening to music and you're completely present, the sound, the silence between notes, there's no you separate from the listening. There's just music happening. This is what Zen calls no mind or mushin. Not absence of mind, but absence of self-consciousness. Complete absorption. Complete presence. And here's the profound joke. This state isn't something you achieve through effort. Effort creates the very self-consciousness that blocks it. The moment you try to be present, you've created a gap, the one trying and the state being tried for. So Zen training involves this strange paradox. Intense discipline and practice, yet simultaneously recognizing that all practice is ultimately futile, because what you're seeking is already here. You already are what you're looking for. The practice, then, isn't about getting somewhere. It's about recognizing where you already are. It's about removing the obscurations that prevent you from seeing what's always been the case. You are the Buddha. You always have been. You just didn't notice. Let me return to this point about the irreducible rascal within each of us, the Yetzer Hara in Jewish theology. Zen acknowledges this completely. Unlike certain religious traditions that demand you become purely virtuous, purely good, purely selfless, Zen recognizes this is impossible and unnecessary. The enlightened person isn't someone who has eliminated all selfishness, all desire, all ego. That would create a psychological corpse. The enlightened person is simply someone who no longer takes these things seriously, who knows they're part of the play. You can be completely selfish and completely enlightened, so long as you're not deceived about what you're doing. The problem isn't selfishness. The problem is unconscious selfishness that pretends to be something else. When you're genuinely affectionate with someone, there's an understanding. We're all part rascal. We all have these impulses. The difference is whether we're conscious of them or pretending they don't exist. Zen monks in medieval Japan weren't paragons of virtue in the conventional sense. They drank, they enjoyed sensual pleasures, they engaged in sophisticated political maneuvering. But they did so consciously, without self-deception, without pretending to be other than they were. This is why they could be genuinely helpful to others. There was no hypocrisy, no secret shame, no projection of their unacknowledged darkness onto others. When you acknowledge your own rascality, you stop being righteous. And when you stop being righteous, you become genuinely compassionate because you recognize that everyone else is navigating the same human condition. Zen ultimately is about this radical acceptance, accepting reality exactly as it is, accepting yourself exactly as you are, without adding conceptual judgments of good and bad, right and wrong, success and failure. This doesn't mean you stop having preferences or making ethical choices. It means you stop torturing yourself with abstract ideals of how things should be instead of seeing how things actually are. From this acceptance comes genuine freedom, not freedom from circumstances, but freedom within circumstances. Not the freedom to make everything perfect, but the freedom to dance with whatever appears. The music is playing. It always has been. The question is simply, will you continue analyzing the score or will you stand up and dance? If these explorations resonate with you, subscribe to this channel for more philosophical and psychological depth. Share this with someone who might need to hear it. Leave your reflections in the comments. I genuinely want to know how these ideas land with you. For those ready to go deeper, check out Beyond the Shadow for understanding Jung's core psychological framework, and Dialogues with the Unconscious for practical 30-day exercises in Jungian psychology. Links are in the description. Remember, you're not trying to become enlightened. You're recognizing that you already are. The only question is, when will you notice? Thank you for being present with me today. Until next time, keep waking up.